today. Ezras Hashem. Today's daf is Masechta Menachos Daf Kuf Aleph. Hold on a second. Let me make this smaller. Oops. Okay. Daf Kuf Aleph. Today's daf is Daf Kuf Aleph, 101. And we're starting the new parak over here. Okay. Okay. You can see it on the screen over here. Okay. I have to close off the file and then reopen it. Okay, hold on. Pardon me. Okay. Otherwise it gets messed up. Okay, starting the new parak, the 12th parak. So the Mishnah begins. Hamenachos. Now, so in order for it to understand that there are two types of kedushas in the Beis Hamikdash. One type of kedusha in the Beis Hamikdash, you see on your screen, there's a pasuk that says that if you donate a animal for a carbon, like Hemash Yaakov Menu carbon Lashem, then that's it. There's no, you can't exchange it, you can't redeem it, nothing. And you have to bring it up as an offering to the Eibishter. But the only time you could redeem it, and that's called Kedusha Saguf, when the body of something is supposed to be brought in the Mizbeach, there's no redemption. However, an animal that gets a blemish, so the Torah says, if it gets a blemish, then you can redeem it. So that's called Kedusha Saguf. Rest of the stuff that you donate to the Beis Hamikdash, if you donate, a chair to the Beis Hamikdash or anything like that, is called Kedushas Damim. And even if you donate, let's say, flour to the Beis Hamikdash, as long as you didn't put it into a koli vessel, it has a din of Kedushas Damim. Its just value is holy, and you could redeem it. So that's the basic theme of the Mishnah. Hamanachas. Let's say you donated flour for mincha. Okay, so the guy has flour here, and he donated it. He wants to make it for a mincha, right? Flour. He's making flour for a mincha. V'hanasachim, or he has oil or wine, but shenitbu, it became tamei. So the Mishnah says, if you didn't put it into a holy Beis Hamikdash vessel, yesh lem pidyon, you could redeem it. And with the redemption money, you buy yourself brand new menachos. Mishakit should be kili, but once you put it into a vessel, ein lem pidyon, cannot redeem it, because the Torah only says you can redeem something if it's an animal that has a blemish. But if it's a flour offering, an oil, if it becomes tamei, you can't redeem it. The Mishnah says, now a strange thing. Ha'oif is birds. Okay, birds has a kedusha saguf, but va'etzim, the wood that you put on the mizbeach, malavoina, or frankincense, that's going to be part of a carbon mincha that you didn't mekadosh bekli, or klisharis, or any vessel, any klisharis, any keli in the Beis Hamikdash, mishenitnu, even if it became tamei, ein lem pidin, you can't redeem it. So you can't redeem it. You can't transfer the kedusha for it. Shaloi nema pidyon ela behema. Pidyon, redemption, it was only said by an animal. Okay. Omar Shmuel. Shmuel said, Shmuel is talking about the menachos and the nesachim. And he says, although the Mishnah says that the only time you can redeem menachos and nesachim is only if they became tamei, but Shmuel says, "Va'afile hein tahar," even if they're tahar, even if you just want to, you made the flour over here, and you decide you just want to get better flour. I don't know. So you want to redeem it, or you need it for your house. Guests are coming. So therefore, you could redeem it. You don't have to wait till it becomes tamei. My tama. So what's the reason for that? So the answer is simple. As long as he didn't put it into a vessel belonging to the Beis Hamikdash, kedushas namin ninu. You just made holy just the value of that flour. It's not itself holy; it's the value of the flour that's holy. Kedushas damim, that kedusha that's of the value, nifted, could be redeemed. Says the Gemara, but doesn't our Mishnah says that the only time you could redeem a mincha before it went into a vessel is if it became tamei? And says the Gemara, who adin the afagav loynitlu, the halacha would be the same if it didn't become tamei. But I did the kotani misna sefer mishakitcha b'kli ein lehem pidyon that we said since the end of the Mishnah, since the second part of the Mishnah says that if you put the mincha in a vessel, you can't redeem it, even if it became tamei. because it becomes Kedushas Ha-Guf. So therefore, to make it parallel, the beginning of the Mishnah, which talks about Kedushas Daman, says the word Nitbu, but Taman Ran Resha, Nitbu actually Kach Kli. Even if it didn't become Kadosh and a Kli, the Mishnah says it could be redeemed. So Mishnah Menachos Daf that says that before you put it into a vessel, you could redeem it, is even if it did not become Tameh. So the Gemara says like this. Pshita, when you put it into a vessel, the Mishnah says you can't redeem it. Of course you can't redeem it. If you put the mincha, the flour, into a holy vessel, kedusha saguf niru, so then then the flour itself becomes holy, and the Chumash says you cannot redeem something that's so holy. So the Gemara says, what's the chiddush of the Mishnah? The Gemara is asking, what's the chiddush of the second part of the Mishnah? And says the Gemara, Itzrach, I need it. I would have thought, since a balmum, when an animal gets a blemish, the Torah doesn't call it a blemished animal. The Torah calls it a tamei animal. So tamei name kabaldun dami. So I would think that if the flour mincha becomes tamei, it's like an animal that gets blemish. And I would think, just like an animal that gets blemished, you could redeem it. I would think that flour you could also redeem. The Kodesh Kedushas Haguf, even though it's holy Kedushas Haguf, just like when an animal gets a blemish, you could redeem it. Hariname nifrek, so a mincha nesachim that's holy because it went into a holy vessel. You should once it becomes a tame, you could redeem it because it's like an animal that got a blemish. Kamash malam the live ki haytame kairachmon al balbum. That's not what it meant. When the Torah called a balmum tamei, only a really blemished animal could be redeemed, but a tamei nesachim cannot be redeemed. We go to Amid Aleph, the Kli Sharish, loy ashkan demifrek. Once something is into a holy vessel, you put mincha into a holy vessel, we never find that you could redeem it. And same thing over here, and even an animal that after you shecht it, you can't redeem it. So Kli Sharis cannot be, something that enters a Kli Sharis cannot be redeemed. Now, you just said before that the Torah calls a balmum a tamei. Where did the Torah call a blemished animal tamei? Ubalmum hechi ikri tamei. Where was the balmum called a tamei? The Tanya, the answer is simple. You read Chumash. The Torah tells you, the Torah tells you that if it's a tamei animal, that you cannot bring it as a carbon to Hashem. Now, something strange with this, then the Torah tells you, redeem it. You could redeem it. Now, the Torah tells you that this animal cannot be brought as a carbon to Hashem, but it implies that it could be eaten. If it literally meant the tamei animal, it cannot be eaten either. So the Gemara says that this pasuk is talking about, that says this redemption is talking about b'bali mu'mim shniftu hakasim adama. The Torah is talking about an animal, a holy animal, let's say an oila, that gets a blemish. You could redeem it. Says the Braisa ata oima, you say it's b'bali mu'mim shniftu enu ela b'behemat tamei mamish. Maybe the Torah is talking about a real tamei animal, that if you donate a tamei animal to the Beis Hamikdash, let's say you donate a non-kosher animal to the Beis Hamikdash, you could redeem it. When the pasuk says, if you donate a non-kosher animal, you could redeem it. So there's another pasuk that says that. It's the Torah discusses a non-kosher animal, a behema tmeya. So what does it mean? The beginning, that if you have a non-kosher animal, you could redeem it, the first pasuk. That's not really talking about a non-kosher animal. It's talking about the bali munim shniftu akasim adam. And the Torah teaches you that if a behema, a kosher animal, that was supposed to be a carbon oila, and it gets a blemish, you could redeem it. But the Torah expresses that as calling the blemished animal tamei. And then the Braisa finishes off. Let's say the animal gets a blemish, but this blemish is going to heal itself. I would think that you could redeem this animal. Talmud Loima, the pasuk says, "Ashli Yaakov imenu carbon Lashem, Mishay nekrever Lashem kol ikar." that only is if it's a type of blemish that you'll never be able to offer it up as a carbon because it has a permanent handicap. Yatzuzu, but if it has a blemish that's going to heal, if it's not brought up today, you could bring it up tomorrow when it heals. So that then that animal cannot be redeemed. Okay, so now we go back to Shmuel. Shmuel began our discussion today and said that if something's kedushas damim, you have flour that you didn't put it into a holy vessel belonging to the Beis Hamikdash, so only it's called kedushas damim. The value of the flour is holy, even if it didn't become tamei. So let's say you're making this mincha at home, and all of a sudden company shows up. You could redeem it and now serve the company this flour. So that's what Shmuel said. So Moisev Rav Huna bar Manoach, so Rav Huna bar Manoach asked the question against Shmuel. Our Mishnah said, "Oifis a bird, le'etzim and wood, alvoina ukli sharish shenitmeu, that they became tamei, ein lehem pidyon. There's no redemption. Shloinem pidyon el b'behemoth. The Mishnah says that the only time you can redeem is only if it's an animal that has a blemish. So let's understand this Mishnah, because part of this is talking about kedushas damim. So the Gemara says like this: Bishlama oifes kedushas aguf ninu. I understand why a bird that was designated as a carbon, you cannot redeem it, even if it gets a num, is because v'leinema ella bebehema. Redemption is only by an animal, not by a bird. Ella eitzim levina, let's say wood, and levina, let's say frankincense, that's not in a klisharis, or a klisharis, just a regular vessel belonging to the Beis Hamikdash, which is not offered under the mizbeach. It's not like a carbon. Liper parka, why can't you redeem it? Even after it becomes tamei. Elalav, it must be like this. Really, the only time you could redeem something is only if it's tamei and you can never undo the tumah. So not like Shmuel said. Let's say that the kedushas damim could only be redeemed only if this flour became tamei, and once something like food becomes tamei, you can't throw it into the mikvah. So these are not really tamei, because they're not really tamei. There's eitzim levina. Elalab b'shum de tarim ba'alma ein ifdan. Really, if it's tar, you can't redeem it. Bahani nami, these two, afagav de nitmu ketarim damim. These things that become tamei are really tar. Why? The eitzim levina lavnei ashvu uchleninhu. The wood and frankincense can never become tamei because they're not food. And the reason why it's not tamei, sometimes we find that wood becomes tamei. If it comes connected to kedusha, yeah, maybe it'll be susceptible to tumah. But the eitzim wood, as long as you don't slice it into firewood, it's not kosher to put on the mizbeach. So therefore, the wood itself is not tamei, and therefore it cannot be redeemed. And because it's kedushas damim, it's not tamei, cannot become tamei, it's not redeemed. Levina nami, frankincense is not edible, but and so therefore it cannot become tamei. As long as you didn't put it into a holy vessel, it doesn't become susceptible to tumah. So it's like wood, and therefore you can't redeem it. Klisharis, a regular vessel belonging to the Beis Hamikdash, even it could become tamei, but it's not a permanent tamei. Hoil the islay tarba mikvah. Since you could bring it into the mikvah, it could become pure. So everything makes sense only if you learn, not like Shmuel, that tahorim, things that are tar, cannot become redeemed. And eitzim, levina, klisharis are considered like tar, and that's why it is cannot be redeemed. And Shmuel says no, kedushas damim always could be redeemed. Always could be redeemed. You could redeem anytime kedushas damim. You could redeem this flour and give it to your company. How do you make sense of the Mishnah? Answers the Gemara, loy, not so. I will tell you, like Shmuel is correct. Even if it's tahar, it could be redeemed. Bahani, these things of eitzim, levina, mishrim de, it's not common to replace it. If you're going to redeem it onto money, where are you going to get another one? And it's not like you could go to Amazon and buy a new klisharis. To make a whole keli was a process. So the Gemara says, Bishlam and Levina klisharis loishchichi. You can't find the klisharis and Levina. That's why Chazal said that you can't redeem it, because we're not going to be able to replace it. But Ela Eitzim, says the Gemara, asks, Bishkach shchichi, you could find always wood. So why would Chazal say you can't redeem wood? Because you'll never be able to replace it. Why not? You go to the forest, there's plenty of wood there. And says the Gemara, Eitzim Nami, proper word, kosher word for the Mizbeach is very hard to find. Kivin do Mamar, Hilka kol eitz, klas, posel lagab Mizbeach, Hilka chlichchichen. Since you need a special wood that doesn't have any worms in it, and therefore it's not so common to find a replacement wood for the Mizbeach once you redeem it. So really, the Gemara is concluding now, Shmuel is correct, that something is tar and it's only Kedushas Damim, you could redeem it, like the flour. Even if it didn't become Tameh, you could redeem it and give it to your company. But if it was wood or Levina or Klishares, things like that, we say that you shouldn't redeem it even if it's tahar, because it's going to be hard to replace. Amar Papa said, Shmuel would have heard the following brisa. He would have changed his mind. Oh boy. Other Tanya, we learned in the brisa, someone who donates an animal, a kosher animal that potentially be used as a carbon, let's say a little sheep. And he says, I don't want to give it as a carbon. I just want it to donate it to the Beis Hamikdash. And they should use a sheep or sell it or do whatever they want with it. So when the Beis Hamikdash sells it, they only sell it to somebody who's going to use that animal as a carbon. Something that could be put on the Mizbeach, we can never redeem it to make it chulin. You have to use it, sell it to somebody who's going to use it as a carbon. But wait a second, when a person donated a sheep, he donated Kedushas Damim. It's like he donated a bench to the Beis Hamikdash. It's not inherently valuable to the Mizbeach, and yet you say you can't redeem it. The Brisa says that although it's Kedushas Damim, you can't redeem it since it can never become Tameh. It's an animal. So if Shmuel would have heard that Brisa, have a hard debate, he would have retracted and said, okay, when Kedushas Damim that we said you could redeem it, it's only if it becomes Tameh. So this Brisa seems to disagree with Shmuel. That's what Rav Papa said. It's not so. If Shmuel would have heard of that Brisa, he wouldn't have retracted. The reason why we say certain things can never be redeemed, something that's not common, you can't find it, it cannot be redeemed. Now, most animals are not kosher for the Mizbeach. Since most animals are disqualified as a carbon, even if it has a little thing in its eye, it's disqualified for the Mizbeach. So therefore, since it's not common, we said that even Shmuel would agree that although Kedushas Damim could always be redeemed across the board, whether it's Tamei or not, but if it's something that it cannot be found, Chazal said, don't redeem it, or we're not going to allow you to redeem it because it's very, very hard to find a replacement. Says the Gemara, that was the opinion of Shmuel, that Tahorin, even if it's Tahar, it could be redeemed. Rav Kahana says, Tameim nivdim, Tahorim ein nivdim. If it's Tamei, it could be redeemed. If it's Tahar, it cannot be redeemed. So Rav Kahana disagrees with Shmuel. Only if Kedushas Damim is Tamei, it can be redeemed. Rabbi Shaya, Tameim nivdim, Tahorim ein nivdim. Rabbi Shaya, according to the version, agreed with Kahana, but not with Shmuel. That even Tahorin could be redeemed like Shmuel. So Rabbi Shaya, according to the second version, agrees with Shmuel. Rabbi Lazar makes a compromise. Kulam, all Kedushas Damim, Tamei niftin, Tahorin ein niftin. If it's Tamei, it can be redeemed. If it's Tahor, it cannot be redeemed, not like Shmuel. If it's Tahor, it can't be redeemed. If you're bringing a minchas chayte, remember, if you swear falsely, the Torah says that if you're too poor and can't afford an animal or birds, you can bring a mincha. If you learn the psukim over there, the Torah implies that you could redeem a minchas chayte even if it's not tamei. For example, the Torah tells you from drushes that let's say somebody who did the avera of swearing falsely. Now he said he's poor, and he set aside money to buy a mincha because he's poor, and then all of a sudden he's rich. He became wealthy, so we allow him to redeem his carbon mincha and buy a bird or an animal, depending on his financial status. So we see that minchas chayte could be redeemed even if it didn't become tamei. So that's special that the Torah said it could be redeemed. But a regular mincha, a donated mincha, that you're donating and it's tahar, it cannot be redeemed. Only if it's tamei could be redeemed. Says the Gemara, Omar Abishai said, a new Gemara, but it will come back to this Gemara. Shmati, I heard, Pigel b'mincha, Rab Shimon Eimatamatum is oichlim. If someone was mafagel the mincha, what does that mean? So let's say you did the kamitza, and this man who's doing the kamitza had in mind that he's going to eat the mincha in 3 days from now. So he made the mincha pigel. So now pigel is osir to eat, right? And also to have hana. When something is an item of food that you cannot benefit from, according to Rab Shimon, it cannot become tamei. And therefore cannot be mitama water, it cannot do other things. Now we learned in the Mishnah, arla, fruits that are arla, right? The first, so you can't eat it. It's asar b'hana, klaya karim, or fruits that are klayim. We go to Amid Beis, V'shar Niska, or an ox that you slaughtered that you were supposed to kill because it killed a human being. The egla rufa, an egla rufa that you slaughtered, utzipari mitzayra, or utzipari mitzayra that was slaughtered. Upeta chamar, or peta chamar was slaughtered for a guy. So it's hard to understand because basically we have to turn these into a food in order to say what we're about to say. So peta chamar, you shechted. Let's say you cook milk and meat. They're all susceptible to become tamei foods. They cannot become susceptible for tumah food. So if a sheretz falls on a cheeseburger, it will not become tamei. Rab Shimon, that's what Rab Shimon said, but not by basar b'chalav. Let's say if a sheretz will fall on arla, it would not become tamei. Rab Shimon by cheeseburger of basar b'chalav, Rab Shimon would agree that it would become susceptible to tumah. Because at one time it was kosher, meat was kosher, the milk was kosher. You could have eaten the milk and meat separately, so therefore it was susceptible to tumah. My Talmud Rab Shimon. What's the reason of Shimon? Food that you could eat to feed other people, that's food, and it could become tamei. But if it's food that cannot be fed to other people, that's not called a food. So now we get back to Rabbi Oshaya. Rabbi Oshaya says that if you made a mincha unsusceptible, uneatable, by making it pigel, so then it's flour, but it's not susceptible to tumah. It's food that cannot be fed to other people, and therefore it's not tamei. So the Gemara asks a question. Rab Shimon said, "Ihachi basar b'chalav teipik le'oichel shati yochel achira echemhu." Why did Rab Shimon say that basar b'chalav is susceptible to tumah? Because the basar was at one time kosher, the chalav was at one time kosher, and therefore it's even if you put it together, it's susceptible to tumah. Wait a second, even if you put it together, you could feed it to other people. It's not asur b'hana. You see, we hold that basar b'chalav is asur b'hana. You can't benefit from it. You can't feed it to your goyish worker. But the Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Rab Shimon ben Yehuda, Rab Shimon, basar b'chalav, asur b'chila, mutar b'hana. Basar b'chalav is not, you're not permitted to eat, and it's permitted to benefit from. You're allowed to give your workers basar b'chalav. Torah tells you don't cook milk and meat because you're a holy nation. And the pasuk also says, "Don't eat treifa," and it also calls you're a holy people. Malahalan, just like treifa animal, also b'achila mutar, you're also to eat it, but you could sell it to a guy or give it to a guy. Avkan also b'achila, so also by basar b'chalav, also b'achila mutar. So the question is, since you could feed it to other people, Why does Rab Shimon need a new reason why basar b'chalav is susceptible to tuma? The fact is that I could give it to somebody else. Rab Shimon holds that basar b'chalav is mutter to be fed to a guy. And says the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon gave you two reasons. One reason is the really basar b'chalav, I could feed a guy, and therefore, if you could feed a guy, it's really food. It's susceptible to tumah. And even according to the Chachamim, that basar b'chalav cannot be fed to a guy, but at one time it was kosher food. Basar b'chalav separately was kosher food, so basar b'chalav together is susceptible to tumah. Bottom line, so far we learned, and we're going to just end with one question, with a teretz. We learned that Rabbi Shaya said that if you mafagel the mincha, if you had a bad thought doing the kamitza of the mincha, the rest of the mincha is not susceptible to tumah. So if a sheretz falls on this flour, it is not susceptible to tumah. So Meisvei, the Gemara asks a question. Rab Shimon Omer, Yesh Noisher Shemtama Tumas Oichlem, Yesh Noisher She'enim Matama Tumas Oichlem. The Brisa says, Rab Shimon says, some Noisher is susceptible to Tumah, and some Noisher is not susceptible to Tumah. Keitzad, Lon Lef Nezrika Enim Matama Tumas Oichlem. If it was Noisher and they never sprayed the blood, so you never ate the meat of this carbon, it was never kosher because you never sprayed the blood. So it was never food. So, and it's a food that cannot be fed to other people. So it's not susceptible to tumas oichlem. Okay, fine. But pigel bein kachin bein kachin kalam eina metamas tumas oichlem. Pigel mincha metamet tumas oichlem. Rabbi Shimon in this brisa says if it's pigel of a carbon, right, it doesn't become susceptible to tumah because right away it's puzzle. But pigel mincha would become susceptible to tumah. And you just told me, Rabbi Shaya, that pigel mincha is not susceptible to tumah according to Rabbi Shimon. So how do you explain this stira? Like kasha, no difficulty. Kan shoysu leishasa kaisha. Kan shoysu leishasa kaisha. This pigel mincha was kosher at one time. You made it pigel after the kamitza. You made it pigel later on. So one time it was kosher. And so therefore it's matama tumas oichlem. Here it was never had any time that it was kosher. And therefore it cannot matama tumas oichlem. That was what Rabbi Shaya was discussing. When was it? It was never had a moment that you could have eaten it. If you made it holy when it was connected to the ground. So right away it was a mincha. It was holy right when it was never chulin. And you were never mekadosh. So right when it was connected, the wheat was connected to the ground, it was holy. So it never was food that could be eaten by other people. So because it's food that can never be eaten by other people, that is why it's not susceptible to tumah. Says the Gemara, Velef Rekinu. Why didn't you paid it? So why can't you paid it if it becomes, you could always paid it. And if you're going to say that Rabbi Shaya holds that if something is Torah, cannot be paida, so once it became flour, you can never paid it unless it became tamei. So therefore, it was always kedushadik. According to the opinion that Rabbi Shaya holds like Shmuel, that you could always be paid it. So this flour could be edible food to people. It was always holy from the time that you cut it and harvest the grain, but you could always be paid it. There's no strings attached. You could always be paid it. If Rabbi Shaya held like Shmuel, and says the Gemara, this will stop. Hashta mir leparak. As long as he didn't redeem it, it was always holy flour. And if it was holy flour, and you mafagel it later on, it never had a moment that it was food. And because it's never a moment that it was food, it would not become susceptible to tumah. Okay, we'll continue with this discussion tomorrow, Be'ez Hashem.